On today's, on the other hand, we talk with someone working across lines of division. Here's a sneak preview.
Hate is like the cheapest form of politics, and it's also the most successful form of
Mhm.
politics. And so if you can create hate and dissension and dislike, you're going to be successful. And I think you see that play out right now, and it's unfortunate. We don't need to fall into that trap. We need to make sure that we're keeping open dialogue, communication, that we're being respectful.
This is On the Other Hand, a podcast sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, where hope and common ground meet.
Each episode features community leaders from Arkansas and beyond, sharing stories and insights on how together we can strengthen both our relationships and our communities.
Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, April Chatham Carpenter, and I'm here today with my co-host, Glenn White. On our podcast, we interview community leaders in Arkansas and beyond who are working towards solutions across political or other divides, or who in other ways try to make things better for our communities. Glenn, who do we have on today?
April, we have the distinct pleasure of talking today with two folks from the state legislature, Arkansas State Senators Clarke Tucker and Jonathan Dismang. We had them on because they have been known to develop a working relationship with some degree of productivity on various issues and legislation that they have common interests in. And that's despite the fact that they're actually in opposing parties and they have a lot of differences on some of the views on politics and policy. But despite that, they're here to tell us how they do that. So let me start with a little bit of a background on each of them. We'll start with Clarke. Clarke Tucker, he's a Democratic state senator from Little Rock, native Arkansan, attended Little Rock Central High, got his bachelor's in government from Harvard University and a law degree from University of Arkansas School of Law. He's married with two kids. And he served in the Arkansas House of Representatives from 2015 to 2019. And then he was elected to the Arkansas Senate in 2020, and he's still there. Among his key areas of legislative focus, and y'all correct me if any of this is wrong, but expanding health care access, that would include preserving Medicaid expansion, mental health crisis stabilization services, hunger and food insecurity solutions, and that would include something I'm sure we'll hear about, the free school breakfasts and possible expansion of school meals programs, strengthening ethics and transparency, criminal justice reform, and family protections. And he also advocates for protections under the Freedom of Information Law in terms of government transparency. His community service includes board leadership and Imagination Library literacy efforts, as well as organizations that support Little Rock Central High School, and he's engaged in church civic boards. So that's Clarke. Jonathan Dismang is a Republican senator for District 18. He's also a native Arkansan. Graduated from Beebe High School, got his bachelor's degree in accounting and economics from Harding University, and now lives in Beebe with wife and two sons, active in church and local civic groups. Been in the legislature since 2009, in the House first, then in the Senate since 2010. Some of the legislative interests to Jonathan include property tax issues, income tax reductions, unemployment benefits, tax exemptions, landlord-tenant law updates, and industry regulation adjustments. Jonathan has served as President Pro Tem and was named among the 12 state lawmakers to watch. His business and civic involvement includes consulting services, real estate oversight, and working with youth and community organizations. So that's them individually. We did want them here to talk about their work together, their bipartisan work and friendship, which, as I understand, is grounded in a shared commitment they have to public service and improving the state of Arkansas. So reportedly, they intentionally sought common ground on social issues like food insecurity, homelessness, and school nutrition. They met early in legislative sessions to identify the shared priorities, and that's how they've gone about it, as I understand it. The working relationship is said to have involved frank conversations and yet mutual respect. They maintain open dialogue. They influence each other's perspectives, good for you, and seek practical policy solutions for constituents despite ideological differences. So, as you can see, they both serve as excellent role models for the kind of collaborative and respectful relationships that we like to highlight in our podcast. Unfortunately, that's not as common as Arkansans deserving their public servants, but we're appreciative that they are good role models in that respect. So, Clarke and Jonathan, welcome both of you to On the Other Hand.
Thank you very much for having us. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Well, we're excited to have you both here as well. Now, before I start, just the questions I ask and the questions that April asked will be for both of you, so just consider it an open invitation to respond as you wish. So before we get into the policy and the broader issues, let's start with your relationship in the Arkansas legislature. Tell us how you folks got to know each other and how you realized that you might actually be able to trust each other enough to work across lines.
So, as you mentioned, I got to the House in 2015, and Jonathan was already in the Senate at that time. And not only was he in the Senate, but he was the pro tem. So I was a lowly freshman House member, and he was the head of the Senate. And so, of course, I knew of Jonathan that whole time and saw the way that he ran the Senate, and could just tell from the beginning that he is a person of good faith, which is maybe the single most important characteristic to work with anybody, but also just highly intelligent, gets things done, and didn't work with him on a one-on-one basis quite as much. Of course, we interacted, but then when I got to the Senate, again, before we get to the policy, just on the personal level, my first session in the Senate was 2021, and it was a tough session for me and for a lot of people, and all sessions are hard, but that one was tough. And we were at an event one evening, and Jonathan came up to me and asked how I was doing. And sometimes somebody asks how you're doing, and it's casual small talk, and the person says, I'm fine. How about you? But this was not that type of question. It was a question that he really wanted to know the answer to. Are you hanging in? How are you doing in the Senate this session? He was really checking on me. And just on a personal level, that meant a lot to me, and it just reinforced to me what I had already perceived, again, that he is just a good human being, a person of good faith, someone who's open-minded and supportive, and a good friend.
So you've figured out from that he was genuine here, someone you can rely on and feel comfortable working together. So how did y'all come to decide, hey, let's work together on some legislative issues? How did that come about?
Well, I think there was just a general, we enjoyed each other's company. Obviously, Clarke has great character, and you want to work with people that are principled in the position, even if they're not one that you may have. And you respect the way that Clarke handles himself. It's not showboating. It's not about him. It's making sure that his constituents have the representation that they deserve, even if, the majority of some other Arkansans don't agree with that perspective. And so I think, always done a good job with that. Kind of to piggyback on his story of where we became friends, I think your son had a basketball camp that was in Searcy. He gave me a call. There's some downtime between what they've got doing that parents can attend. And so it's like, hey, okay, well, let's go out to eat, grab something to eat. Hoodats is in Bald Knob down the road from Searcy. So we go down to Bald Knob, go to Hoodats. It's great food. We're having crawdads, and just had a really good conversation where it's pretty easy to identify that we've got a lot of things in common, whether it be age to family to dogs to you name it. We've got a lot of similarities with what's going on in our lives, which, obviously helps to have, to build a relationship. So there we kind of intentionally talked about, what do we want to work on? What are you working on? And how can we work together on that? We identified some issues, food insecurity being one of them. And really, I don't know if you would call it the easiest to tackle, but the one we wanted to tackle the most, kind of on the front end. Yeah. And so working with Kathy Webb and Little Rock and some other organizers on, what is it we need? What do we want to do? And that's where school lunches, the first bite at the apple on school lunches came up, which was a bill that would remove the copay for anyone that received a reduced price.
I can see that it's good that y'all worked with Kathy Webb. She's obviously really big into the food insecurity issue. Good for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can see how that got started. Well, let's find out some more about you.
Yeah, so let's follow up on that. I think some of our listeners may not actually know how long it takes to get something to, from start of initiative, you're both interested in it, to actually get it to have something that's maybe in law or something that makes a difference. And so tell us more about that journey on that free school breakfast work that you did.
So we're still on that journey. A lot of times anything that's really significant takes multiple years to get done in the state capitol. So Jonathan and we started having that conversation in 2022 at the latest, I would say, maybe 21, but it was in prep for the 23 session. And, it's free and reduced lunch is the name of the program. It's a little bit of a misnomer because it includes breakfast too. But, and so there were kind of 3 phases to that plan. Phase 1, as Jonathan said already, was to eliminate the copay for everyone who qualified for reduced price breakfast and lunch. And that's what we took on first in the 2023 session. And, Jonathan was able to build a strong coalition in his caucus, which was obviously totally necessary to get the bill through. And we put the numbers together and put the policy language together and got that out. And that impacted 49,000 families in Arkansas, which is a really wonderful thing. But that was just part 1. Part 2 was in the 25 session this time last year, when the goal was universal free breakfast for every public school student in Arkansas. And we've really followed the same process, identified we needed to get the language right to make sure that we capture as many federal dollars as we can and structuring all that properly, then identifying the sources of state funding, which Jonathan's the budget chair, so he's the expert at, and then building the coalition to get it through. So that has been going on for at least 4 years, and hope, and we don't know the answer on this yet, of course, is to have universal free lunch, which would be the kind of final piece of that trifecta. So if that were to happen, that would be in 2027. So, that would be a 6-year process at that point.
Is that universal free lunch for every student in public schools?
Yes.
Okay.
For us on that particular issue, Arkansas is a compassionate state, and I think they want their elected officials to show compassion. And I think what we were able to do probably surprised some folks about how popular those issues were. I don't think it surprised the governor. She was 100% in when we went and spoke to her about free breakfast, and she's been a huge advocate and really proud to have her support. In fact, she made that part of her State of the State address at the beginning of the last regular session as one of her primary goals. But again, I think it's been a great program, and it's something that members look at. So let's just take my party. It doesn't always have to be about tax cuts and business policy or whatever. There are some other things that we can do that are equally as popular with our party back home. If I go to a county committee and talk about what we did with tax cuts or whatever else it may be, and we talk about free breakfast, the free breakfast gets the applause, right? I mean, it is a incredibly popular thing. People think that we should be feeding kids, and I think it's just a good example of maybe some other types of things we should be focusing on as a state.
This is what you're asking. I think when we passed that first bill in the Senate, there's 35 senators. We had 32 co-sponsors, 32 or 33 co-sponsors on it. So it looked good when it got to the floor.
Yeah.
That it was going to pass, since we had almost every member signed up as a co-sponsor.
How do you build that kind of coalition? You obviously are on different sides of the aisle. So,
I mean, I think the first thing was not to ask for too much. No, don't do anything that's not realistic, anything that we can't figure out the funding for or that we're not able to afford. That way we don't have anyone that, we don't want to create any doubt when we're trying to create a coalition for legislation. And then also making sure we knew how we wanted to explain it to members of what they were going to sign on to. I mean, it's important for me. I know it's important to him. If I ask someone to sign on as a co-sponsor and we do that, I want to make sure they fully understand what they're buying into. And so I think just being really prepared, or trying to be as prepared as you can for any potential questions, making sure that we've taken away from, any of the negatives that we could from the policy or the potential pitfalls, get all that stuff taken care of before we went to members and said, hey, this is what we'd like to do.
Yeah, you got to have accurate information, which is what Jonathan is saying, in order to maintain credibility with your colleagues, because otherwise the next time you go to them on this issue or another one, they may not be able to trust what you're telling them. So, and we also, Jonathan referenced this, but you also want to know where the governor stands on it before you start asking members. Doesn't mean it's impossible necessarily, but it just helps if the governor's supportive. And obviously, I don't agree with the governor on everything. She and I went to high school together. We've been friends for a long time, and we're also open about the things that we don't always agree about. But I tell people, including folks, in my party at meetings, for me, this governor gets an A on hunger, and she was a stalwart supporter of this on the legislation on this topic from the very beginning. And as Jonathan said, when we were coming into the 25 session last year, for Jonathan and me both, the universal free breakfast was right at the top of our priority list, and we thought, because it was going to be more expensive than the piece we had done before, eliminating the reduced price copay, and it was going to be a heavy lift politically for us to get it done. And then we show up when the session starts, and the governor put it in her speech on the first day of session as one of her top priorities for the session. So, that helps a lot as well.
And I don't think you could really say enough about Kathy Webb's involvement in that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
lots of time when organizations bring ideas forward, they're not really familiar with the legislative process, or they want to do more than we're actually capable of doing. She was able to kind of keep things very realistic. And even when we would say, let's do a little bit more, she's like, no, this is the realistic position to have. And so I think having her engaged was also really helpful.
Echo that 100%. She's an expert on the legislative process, and
Yeah.
so couldn't have done it without her. She's the one that, if there was the seed that was planted, it originated with Kathy. Yeah.
Remind us what Kathy's role is.
I actually served with Kathy in the House. She was budget chair, I believe, when I was in the Senate. And so we had a relationship from her time in the legislature. Later, she became, is it president of
She was executive. She's retired now, but at the time she was executive director of the Arkansas Hunger Relief Alliance. Yeah.
That's the connection.
When she left the legislature in 2000, at the end of 2012, I believe, that's what she became. Yeah. That she took that role at the Alliance and, held it for about 10, 11, 12 years, somewhere in there. Yeah.
So I'm sure that maybe not on this issue there, but in other issues that you all have disagreed on policy. I often think about if two people agree on everything, then one of them may not be necessary, because we can always sharpen each other's ideas.
Absolutely.
But what helps you keep those conversations productive rather than going personal when you have disagreements?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of, there are issues that are personal, right? But there's also policy. And I think one of the things you do is just try to have conversations. Having conversations is important. I think when people aren't talking, that's really when you have the bigger problems. And I think it's just important. It's important to me, and I think it's important to him. We may not agree, but I do want you to understand why I have the position that I have. I just think it's helpful to come from that perspective, as opposed to you have to believe what I believe, or think what I think, or whatever it may be. So it's important to me just to be able to explain why, and also accept when someone else tells me why they have a position that may be contrary to mine, and that's okay. But at least they have a reason for the position.
Yeah. And for me, I think just being a legislator, probably for any member, but especially as a member of a minority party, I keep process and policy in completely separate lanes. So for me, my process, I want that to be pristine. I want to be above board. If I tell somebody I'm going to do something, then I do it. I don't try to hide the ball or sneak anything past anybody. Be upfront. And I think if you handle things right on the process side, it gives you more leeway on the policy side to have those more substantive conversations. And like Jonathan just said, we have very open conversations about where we stand on policy. And I think to me, are there times when we disagree and I'm trying to persuade him or he's trying to persuade me? Sure. But I think the more common way of something happening is he just knows something that I don't know about, or I know something that he doesn't know about. And he might say, hey, what if we try to do it this way instead? And I'm like, I'm learning right now. And I think that probably is a better way. And together, collectively, we come up with a better way than either one of us would have done on our own. I think that's really the more common path. But even when it gets to that point where, no, I'm not going to vote for your bill, where he's not going to vote for mine, we're still open about that. We have conversations and explain why. And I say, we don't agree, but I know where you're coming from and I respect that. So we're all good.
And I think, a little bit of it may be, I think it's my approach and your approach too. We have, there's lots of ways to pass legislation. Some members horse trade, or it's if then, or this for that. I think both of us usually just, I prefer, and you do too, let our policy stand on its own. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It doesn't mean I'm going to support something that I don't like, or try to force you to support something you don't like, to support your legislation. And I think that helps with the relationship, to approach it on an issue by issue and not a, hey, if you do this, then I'll do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So far as I'm concerned, every bill stands on its own, and when that one's over, then we move on to the next one.
Don't hold on to the hostilities that might have come up. Not that there were anything hostile between you two, but you just keep moving on to make progress. So sometimes I know whenever I talk to people across political differences, I learn something. Sometimes I even change my mind on issues, and I wonder if has ever been a time when, whether it was with each other or other people, that you've worked across party lines and maybe changed how one of you thought about an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would think absolutely. Typically, my party's in the majority right now, right? So there's not a whole lot of opposition to things that it probably doesn't even make it to the floor if it's too extreme, right? And so for us, I think it's typically looking at the legislation that's come before us, and we're typically working together of what has someone missed in a piece of legislation? Is that really the outcome that they want to have? Because at the end of the day, every bill picks a winner and loser, and it is really, really important that we identify who those winners or losers are. Sometimes it's really straightforward and easy to see, and other times it's pretty cloudy. And so we kind of get into the weeds in the bill, and you may see us both go to the well on a particular bill to speak against it or to ask for changes to it or whatever it may be. But as far as perspective, I mean, we should all value their perspectives. He lives in a different community than I live in. There, things happen in his area that don't happen in mine, or there's facilities in his area that I don't know exist, or whatever it may be. It's important for us to keep trying to learn from someone else's perspective because we're representing the state as a whole. I mean, we have our districts that, we're beholden to, and we should be, but there's also big picture items that we need to be making sure we have a full picture of what's really happening.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, a big part of my answer was what I said already, which is that I think a lot of times when we have different perspectives, it's more like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about it. That is a good idea. Let's, let's work together and kind of combine what we were thinking to do this other thing. And yeah, there are times when I've changed my mind on a vote based on conversations, with other members. It's like you said, April. I mean, if you have 35 people agree up here, then that's 34 too many. And, some of the richest conversations I've had down here are with people who were disagreeing about something. And yeah, I've changed votes based on conversations and based on testimony from the public. There was a time in state agencies last session when I specifically remember it was about a specific commission, and I had my mind made up to vote a certain way. And some folks came to testify before the committee, and they flipped my vote 180 degrees. So yeah, it happens, and you want to keep. If you have all the answers, then this is probably the wrong job for you, because I learn more in a day down here than I do doing anything else in my life. And so, yeah, keep your ears open, learn from other people's perspectives who have different life experiences, like Jonathan said, and you're going to come out a richer person on the other side.
And one thing I'll just say, because I think we almost are alluding to it now, most of everything we do is not partisan. There is very little that I would call partisan. Those are the things that make the paper, right?
Yep.
But 95% of everything we're doing doesn't make the paper, and it has nothing to do with partisan politics. Doesn't mean they don't need to be right. They should be right. Again, we go back to the winner and loser situation, but most of what we have shouldn't be something that's directed by our political party position.
Yeah. And with my background as a lawyer, a lot of times what I'm doing with members, especially in this 95% category that Jonathan said, where it's not partisan, is a member will say, they'll sit down in the committee and say, this is what I'm trying to do. And then I read the words on the paper and I think these two things don't match. And so I will help that person. I'm like, we need to make sure that the language in this bill is right, because when it's implemented, you're not going to be there to say what you meant. All they're going to have are the words on this piece of paper. And so again, people will say, oh, thank you. And we will amend the bill and get it written in a way where we think it clearly reflects what the member's intending to do, and it can be interpreted by the people who are implementing it, so that's just another example.
One of the things I really appreciate hearing from y'all is that you seem to be motivated to a great degree by what the facts are and by what is right, basically by your values, not because the person who had this idea is a Democrat or a Republican or something like that. It goes to that thing that we talk about a lot in our work in Braver Angels, is to, in a democracy, for people to work together, you have to rely more and more on what your values say rather than what your tribe says. Because if you're all tribal and just go with what everybody else in your tribe says and your party says, then it means nothing's going to get done, and or else it's all going to be one-sided, and we know where that leads eventually.
That's right. I feel like I'm selling my constituents and the people of Arkansas short if I'm not willing to consider something that wasn't thought up by myself or a Democrat or whatever the case might be. There are plenty of times when a Republican is running, I mean, Democrats too, but plenty of times when a Republican is running a bill and I think I'm almost jealous that I didn't have the idea for the bill because I think it's so good. So, and I'm happy to vote for it. But yeah, that happens on a regular basis.
Good. One of the things I really like about what you guys offer here is a healthy way of having relationships that are productive and collaborative without giving up your own stances on policy and that sort of thing. As you know, that's not generally the way things have been working lately nationally, and to what we can tell in the state as well. We've seen the political polarization deepen over the years. It seems really difficult right now in this country. And I want some advice from you guys, since you're able to walk the walk and the kinds of things that we support and think are important. Tell us what you think others in government, as well as people in other settings outside government, can learn from your experiences about how important it is, the value of working together despite having significant differences. What advices do you have for other people?
I mean, I don't know particularly that, but probably watch less news and read more is helpful. I mean, I think that's where a lot of the polarization starts, social media also, but I think that goes to more face-to-face conversations. I think that's part of what's happened with the decline on how we treat each other is it's no longer face-to-face. We're doing it through a keyboard that, no one knows the other person on the other end, and you say a lot of things you probably normally wouldn't say. So again, I think face-to-face conversations, being able to keep a dialogue, being respectful of positions, all those things are going to help. And we all know what it likes. I mean, I was in the minority party when I first got into the legislature. In 2009, we were the minority. I believe there was 24, 25 of us Republicans in the House. So I fully understand what it felt like to work in the minority party. But I would also say I was elevated to leadership almost immediately by Democrats. They allowed me to participate and be a part of the process. Same thing was true when I came into the Senate. There was 8 out of, I think, the 35 Republicans when I started, and all that's flipped since then. But again, I was never treated as if I didn't have a role to play. And so that's part of the perspective that I bring.
Yeah, I think, in the South, we're taught don't talk about religion, money, and politics. And I think we have to strike politics from that lexicon, because if all we do is sit in our home and we watch cable news and we're on social media, it's real easy to hate folks in that circumstance. When I was running for the legislature the first time in 2014, I knew about a number of state legislators based on what I read in the newspaper and that sort of thing. And I had pre-formulated opinions about them. And then I get here and I meet them and I'm like, oh, this is a real life human being. And you get to learn about their families. And as Jonathan said, we're about the same age. We have kids that are about the same age. And, you get to know the people and their families and what they like and don't like. And it's a lot harder to hate that person. And so why I say that it's good to strike politics from that is because if all we all live in our own bubbles in a sense in this day and age, and we have to get outside of our bubbles. And if all you know is about the other side, and I'm using that generally for whatever group you're talking about, party or whatever, is what you see on cable news, it's really easy to hate them. But if you find out that your next door neighbor who brought you dinner when your spouse was having surgery is a member of the other party that you thought was evil, it makes you pause. And you're like, okay, this is a good person. They have good values. They just have a different opinion than I do. And that brings the tone and the volume down to a more civil place.
Okay. So I'm hearing less time listening to cable news, less time on social media. And if you're going to do that, at least, goodness gracious, educate yourself about its limitations and what to watch for, I would add. And then the other thing I'm hearing that's, you didn't use the R word, but relationship. The more you develop a relationship with someone by getting to know them personally, it breaks down some barriers, it breaks down stereotypes, it makes that person more human and more hard to hate. I like it.
Being self-aware, I think, is a big part of that. Being conscious of the people around you and how you're impacting them is also equally as important. You didn't really say this, but one of the things that I think that you're alluding to, and I think I see it too, is, hate is like the cheapest form of politics, right? And it's also the most successful form of politics. And so if you can create hate and dissension and dislike and all these other things, you're going to be successful. And I think you see that play out right now, and it's unfortunate. And I think, again, that goes back to being self-aware. We don't need to fall into that trap. We need to make sure that we're keeping an open dialogue, communication, that we're being respectful, all of those things, because that's what scares me about some of the ways and directions that we're heading. And I think that's really what you're seeing, is that want to create dissension. It's a moneymaker, right? I mean, there's organizations out there that have made a living, a very good one, off of creating hate and dissension. We just don't need to fall prey to it and allow them to use us for that.
Yeah, I think April mentions this a lot, the notion of conflict entrepreneurs, people who make
That's
their
it.
money by promoting hatred, anger, division, and that sort of thing. That's so important. It brings up another idea that often it seems to me people are doing, as you said, Jonathan, what works, even though it's a negative approach. It arouses hatred, anger, fear, that sort of thing. But they do it because it offers more power and more success, rather than because it's the right thing to do. What in the world can we do to get people more oriented to what's right rather than what brings them more power?
We have to talk about it, and we have to essentially call people out for it in a way, and in the right way. We could do it in such a way that just created more dissension. That shouldn't be the goal. I think it's by example, largely. And that's one of the most powerful things that we can do, is lead by example. I just think that what I would tell a member is the easiest thing in the world to do is oppose something, legislation, whatever it may be. You're not solving any problems. You're just opposition. But to work together to try to create some type of common ground or a solution that works for everyone, that's the hard work. And so convincing members as they're coming into the legislature, don't break your morals or your principles or that sort of thing, but try to be productive. And that means doing things, not just stopping things. And so I think it's just conversations with other members for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a lot to add. I'll say this. I think that there's a dynamic between political leaders and the public, and it goes both ways. It's a two-way relationship, right? And so in some sense, political leaders are a reflection of the public, but you also hope that term political leaders, the word that's inherent to that title is that you actually are leading by example, as Jonathan said. And we all have choices we can make. There have been plenty of times when I was in a campaign where someone brought me something that I could have done that was, a negative type attack. And you have to decide who you are in those moments and who you want to be. And you just hope that the people who are running for office are the ones who are making the right decisions and not just a reflection of the negativity that they see in the political climate, but that they're actually leading us in a different direction.
Yeah, you have to hope that people value doing the right thing and being a good person rather than seeing that as a cynical way to look at things. I appreciate what y'all have to say, and I appreciate the fact that you're both serving as models that way.
I'm sure this is the case for every elected official, right? But I have a lot of people who approach me and say, I want to run for X office. And one of the things I always tell them is when I'm running, I keep my eye on the day after the election as well as the day of the election, because the day after the election, I still need to be able to look my children in the eye and hope that they respect me, or I need to be able to go to my neighborhood grocery store and not cower or cast my eyes at the floor. So anyway, that's one of the things that I always say to people.
It's that self-awareness that Jonathan was talking about. But maybe what makes it tough for some people with that self-awareness is if you become aware of the kind of person you are moving toward, maybe it doesn't look so good and you don't like facing that. So that it takes some courage too to do that.
That's it for part one of our conversation with Senators Clarke Tucker and Jonathan Dismang. We'll pick things up right where we left off in our next episode, so be sure to join us for part two.
And if you liked what you heard today, share the episode with a friend and help us spread stories of bridge building across Arkansas. And remember, On the Other Hand offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find On the Other Hand in your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your hosts, Glenn White.
And April Chatham Carpenter.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.